When the big wind turbine was erected at the Pickering nuclear station. Here's the big wind turbine by the Pickering nuclear station, November 1st, 2009, about 8 p.m. As you can see, it's hardly turning. Everyone watched, and through the years, I think we pretty well have a good idea that about 50% of the time it's not turning at all or not anywhere near its full capacity. That data is available, and it's puzzling why that available data wasn't used to assess the practicality of putting a wind farm out here in the lake. Here we are again. I had to change tack. We're now heading about 20 degrees northeast, back towards Frenchman's Bay. Now, as I was saying before I was interrupted by the change of tack, if we build this wind farm on the assumption that it's going to provide power for 100,000 or so or more houses, then we find out that that power cannot be guaranteed by the windmills. So we're left with the necessity of providing that power through traditional means. That means gas or coal-fired generators or more nuclear power. In either case, the end result is that we have not really succeeded in reducing the demand for electricity. We're merely shifting the demand onto another source that cannot really provide it in the end. At fault here are our lifestyles and the kind of consumer-based society that we are increasingly living in. The whole key point is that the technological fixes, like wind farms, do not really address the need to actually reduce consumption. And until we do that, in fact, the technological tinkering, which I believe to a large degree these industrial wind farms represent, will not get us to where we want to go, and in fact will distract us from the challenge of actually reducing our demand for electricity and getting control of our consumer-driven lifestyles. With respect to our relationship to the natural world and to things we call natural resources, humans have a history of consuming these resources until they're gone. This applies to not only non-renewable resources, but also renewable resources such as fish and wildlife. We have a history, particularly in fisheries, of decimating a resource until there's nothing left of it, and then moving on to the next available resource. Thus, we pretty well decimated the cod fishery on the east coast of Canada. And then we moved on to less appetizing species that we may not have wanted to eat before, but that we created markets for, until they'll also be, if history continues to repeat itself, will be decimated too. It almost seems like we're doing the same thing as far as energy goes now. We've run up against constraints with nuclear power because we've had a few accidents. 3 Mile Island in North America, Chernobyl. They've rattled us. We're nervous about going any farther along the nuclear path. The same with coal-burning generating stations and natural gas generating stations. They consume non-renewable resources. We're nervous about going that way. So wind and solar present the possibility of untapped resources. But this drive to build a wind farm out in Lake Ontario, and in fact it's one of many such plans that are covering all of the Great Lakes. In Lake Erie, they're talking about a wind farm that will supply power for over 1 million houses. There's been no discussion of what kind of impact that would have on the ecology of Lake Erie or on the relationship that humans want to have with these bodies of water. But it seems like a desperate effort, like we're moving on to another resource, and that if history remains true, we'll pursue it to a point of destruction of either of this immediate habitat or to the point where our lifestyles can just no longer be sustained. Better that we make the choices now while we can, reduce our demand for electrical power. November 1st, 2009, about 6 p.m. And here we are again, heading due south into Lake Ontario from Frenchman's Bay. A nice light westerly breeze, and we're moving along about 2.5 knots, picking up speed a bit. It's hard to describe the lake out here. The water right now is a beautiful, chalky, blue-green color, almost transparent. The sun is just about to set, and I just saw a flock of about 100 double-crested cormorants flying past. Now the cormorant is a fish-eating bird that's native to the Great Lakes. About 100 years ago, it had a fairly large and healthy, steady population on Lake Ontario here. Now, in the middle parts of the 20th century, contaminants from various industrial processes, chemicals, pesticides like DDT, got into the food chain of the Great Lakes, particularly in Lake Ontario. And one of the results was that the fish-eating birds, predatory birds such as the cormorant, began to experience reproductive failures. Basically what would happen is the chemicals that were in the fish that the birds were eating caused the shells of the eggs that they laid to be very thin. So when the birds would attempt to incubate their eggs, the shells would break, and that would be the end of the potential young birds. Now since then, in the late 20th century, when we decided to ban some of those chemicals like DDT, some birds, such as the cormorant, have made a comeback. In fact, the cormorant on Lake Ontario has begun to reach population levels that it was originally at in pre-industrial times here. Now, wouldn't you think that would be great? It's kind of a success story for the environment. But not really, because now we see the cormorant in particular as being a competitor for the resources of the lake, such as fish. So government-sanctioned and organized mass slaughters have occurred in order to reduce their numbers again. And this has occurred also in Lake Erie. In Lake Ontario, we've been a little more discreet about it. We've boiled their eggs to prevent them from hatching, and other tactics like that. But it seems like we find it very difficult to share this environment with its original inhabitants. Now with the plan for the windmill farm out here in Lake Ontario, we want to take up more of this habitat, more of this environment. It seems that nothing will stand in their way. After all, it's our God-given right. What are some of the practical answers to some of the environmental crises that we find ourselves in now? True answers, not just technological tinkering or quick fixes or make-work projects masquerading as environmentally sound green initiatives. I'm convinced that there's no getting around it, that it's a little bit tough in the modern sense to live an environmentally sound lifestyle. It basically comes down to doing without. It involves turning your thermostat down 5 degrees or so in the winter, letting it go a little 5 degrees warmer in the summer. It involves buying second-hand sweaters and coats to keep warm in the winter. It involves scaling back everything and discovering a richness within and without ourselves. We can live a very good lifestyle with almost everything second-hand. Clothing second-hand, furniture second-hand, used cars. This sailboat here that I'm in is 40 years old. I put a bit of elbow grease into it to bring it up to a seaworthy condition, but it's not the only one I've done it with. Personally, I don't believe in the aesthetic denial kind of lifestyle where we hide away from the world and deny ourselves the richness of life experience. I don't believe in that. I believe in living life deeply, experiencing as much as we can with our senses, intellectually and spiritually. Technology, by and large, is merely a tool to help us do that, but often in our society it gets in the way and becomes a means to an end in itself. With respect to Lake Ontario here in the Scarborough Bluffs, I don't think we really realize what we have until it's gone. I'm confident that as more people realize the trade-offs here with respect to the proposed windmill farm out here, that they will speak up and say that no, they're willing to turn off a couple of lights, they're willing to make a few small sacrifices to actually reduce the demand for electrical power, and they'll say they want to look out onto this lake and see the wide open spaces untouched by humans. There's the sun just setting over the north shore of Lake Ontario. The early November sunset. As you can see, no one else is out on the lake this time of the year. It's a wilderness, wide open spaces. No sign of man in sight. From this point I could steer a course eastward towards the end of Lake Ontario to the St. Lawrence River, and from there to the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the Atlantic Ocean. There is a sense here of true freedom. June 17th, 2010. Welcome aboard the Garratt. And we're heading west along the north shore of Lake Ontario, about a kilometer or so offshore. And we're on our way